Welcome. I'm Doug Sesserman, privileged to serve as the CEO of Americans for Ben-Gurion University, and it is hashtag Webinar Wednesday, special Thursday edition. Yesterday was Yom Ha'atzmaut in Israel. Israel turned 75 years old, which is quite something to celebrate. And today we're going to be talking about Israel at 75, today's challenges and tomorrow's opportunities. This is our 54th webinar, if you can believe it, and we're bringing back Professor Guy Ben-Porat, who is the most popular and sought after webinar speaker here at A4BGU. This is his 6th webinar, I believe, Guy.
I think 7th, by the way.
It could be 7th. I'm glad you're counting, and we really appreciate you being here. So it is noon Eastern time. I'm in my virtual office in New York City, and Guy is joining us from a conference he's attending in France. It's about 6 p.m. there. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Before we get started, I just want to thank the people behind the scenes that make this also possible. Lenore Levine, who's our Director of Experiences and Events, and Leora Miller and Ellie Ackerman, who helped put all this together, and of course Dana Ben-Yamin, who works in Israel to help curate all of our webinars. And for those of you who don't get enough of our webinars, please join us for our next one, which will be Wednesday, May 31st, with Professor Julia Mirsky, who will be speaking about the history of immigration in Israel and the impact immigration and Aliyah have had on the modern day demographics and the political situation, which we'll also get into today. All right, so with that, Guy, you about to be ready to get started?
Yes, why not?
All right, so you need no real introduction, but I'll give the audience a little bit of an introduction. And remember, for those who have joined us, if you have questions, this format will be a Q&A, an informal conversation between myself and Guy. If you have questions, and I know you will, just click on the Q&A function and ask your questions, and we'll do our best to get them to Guy, and he'll respond in real time. So Professor Guy Ben-Porat is the immediate past chair of the Department of Politics and Government at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and his expertise is in comparative politics and public policy. He's the co-author of Policing Citizens, Minority Policy in Israel, and the author of several other books, including Between State and Synagogue, the Secularization of Contemporary Israel. It got lots of awards. Professor Guy Ben-Porat he received his BA in Political Science and Psychology from Tel Aviv University and his PhD in Political Science from Johns Hopkins in the US. He's the founding director of BGU's new program for shared society, focusing on the academic study and research of Israel's deep divide between the Jewish majority and the Arab minority, and the challenges of balancing its dual commitments as both a Jewish and democratic state. So Guy, I also am privileged to have Guy as just a dear friend, but there's nobody better probably on the planet to talk about the subject today, which is Israel at 75, today's challenges and tomorrow's opportunities. So Guy, why don't we start with the challenges? Give us a fresh update on what's happening just following Pesach.
So I think this has been definitely an emotional Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's a period of that in the past 16 weeks, there have been demonstrations in Israel, all over Israel, of about 200,000 people every Saturday, and during the week, even other demonstrations. And we're definitely in a period of a great challenge to democracy and the state, of a huge divide between the people and the government and between people themselves. And we can even start by looking at the terms people use to describe what's happening now. So what the government is calling a judicial reform, the opposition calls actually an overhaul or revolution or a coup. And since the government has announced its plans about 16, 17 weeks ago, people have been very, very concerned about the future of democracy. And we talked about this before. But if we make the comparison to the US, and I think the comparison is important, well, the US has many checks and balances on its democracy, a constitution, two houses, a president, etc. Israel does not have the same system of checks and balances. We do not have a constitution. Government and parliament are basically the same because parliament is run by the government. So the only real check and balance is the Supreme Court. And what the current government is aiming at is curbing the power of the Supreme Court. Now, while there might be some reason for reform, this government is going way beyond any reasonable reform. And that's what drives people to the streets. The feeling that this government is run by three powers that have a stake at the Supreme Court. One is Netanyahu himself, who, as you know, is under trial, and he has an issue with the legal system. And it could be that this onslaught on the court has something to do with his own personal motivation. You have the ultra-Orthodox parties, who for a long time thought the Supreme Court is curbing their power, not allowing them to maximize their political gains. And you have the extreme right wing, who believe the Supreme Court is curbing their power in the West, in the territories, and not allowing them to implement everything they want. So these three powers coming together at the Supreme Court is what drives this reform, coup, revolution, whatever you want to call it, and what causes many Israelis of great concern. And we see in the streets a relatively wide variety of people. It's not your regular left-wing hardcore activists, but also many centrists, center to left people. One of the largest groups are ex-combatant soldiers who are leading some of these demonstrations. And we are at the point of, we had a break now. The Knesset was on break for a few weeks. And there are discussions at the president's house about a compromise. But now the parliament is resuming next week. The discussions at the president have not yielded a result yet. So we might be heading now into a new clash after several weeks in which we still demonstrated, but it was unclear where things are going. I think the next weeks are going to be about where all this is going. So I think I'll stop here and maybe follow with a question.
Okay, so there was a lot there in what you were saying. Let's roll the clock back a little bit around how did we get ourselves into this situation in the first place? Because Israel is a democracy. Netanyahu had the majority of votes, and then he formed a coalition. And this coalition is more, he finds himself kind of maybe the most liberal member of the coalition. So that brought people to the streets. Maybe walk us back a little bit to how we got to where we got to, and then we can talk about the way forward. Obviously, there was a pause. So these protests are working, and many people feel this is democracy in action when we should be really hopeful. But help us understand how we got to where we got to and where it's going.
So as we said before, I've been doing 6 or 7 webinars which follow elections, which means we had many elections in recent years. So most governments in the past 10 years not been able to resume their 4-year term. They fall apart because of the coalition breaking apart. And every time we have another election, the last election was after the government headed by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, which was a right-wing and a middle center, bit left-wing, with one Arab party, a very, very, I would say, strange or ambitious coalition, which from the get-go, it was very, very doubtful whether it could survive because of different parts of it. And when this coalition fell apart, then we had a new election in which Netanyahu received the credit to form the new government. Netanyahu built a coalition which is based on the Likud party, the two ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and Yehudut Torah, and the extreme right-wing party, among them the Kahana group of Itamar Ben-Gurion. Now, for many years, this group has been ostracized. So they were illegitimate partners to any government. Netanyahu has legitimized them under the claim that we need a stable government, and now they're legitimate. So now we have a government in which you have the ultra-Orthodox, the extreme right, and the Likud. And on the one hand, this gives Netanyahu a stable majority of 64 members of parliament. But the problem is you have to run a government, and a right-wing government has a very hard time on the international level. This government already clashed with the US administration. So what's stable on the inside is unstable on the outside. Now the ultra-Orthodox...
That's actually a really good point, I think, to highlight, right? So this is the most stable coalition Israel's had in some time, but the policies themselves threaten the democratic nature of Israel, even though the coalition came to be through a democratic process.
Right.
And that democratic nature of Israel is also, some might argue, its Jewish nature, or related to its character as a Jewish state. The Jewish state should be a democratic state that cares for its minority population. And
right.
so some of Israel's allies are upset,
right.
as well as the North American Jewish community.
So one great fissure is with the US administration. So a right-wing government may be stable for the inside, but have a hard time running a foreign policy with the world, the US and Europe. And already we see that the clashes, and Netanyahu has yet to be invited to the White House. That's a president. And Joe Biden has clearly made a statement that he's not going to invite him to the White House until the government acts in a way that is in line with the US policy. So that's one issue. Then there's the internal front, which again, the government was elected in a democratic way. But democracy is not only about elections, it's also about checks and balances. It's about minority rights, it's about individual rights. So when you have a right-wing government that endangers rights of minorities, of women, of secular people, you will see resistance. So the fact that they were elected democratically is undisputed. But having said that, once you're elected, you're still bound by the rules of democracy, and that's the major clash now. And what has actually...
And that's really why the judicial reform is this inflection point or issue that's getting so much attention, correct? It represents the slippery slope away from democracy to a more authoritarian style.
The Supreme Court, in many cases, has been able to ameliorate some of the government's decisions by protecting minorities, by protecting rights of LGBT, by allowing women rights. So the Supreme Court was important to... Now, in itself, that's a problem. I mean, this should be handled by a democratic way. And I think that the center-left should have made an effort to convince people and win elections. But having said that, the Supreme Court has played an important role. Let me give you another example why the Supreme Court is important. One thing that I'm not sure that the American audience is aware of is that the Supreme Court actually is a guarantee for IDF soldiers not to be trialed abroad. So for example, when Israel is committed of war crimes, and then people that are responsible can be charged in The Hague by the National Court, Israel's response is no. We have a Supreme Court, we have a court that adjudicates and punishes when necessary. So that's an important part of Israel's legitimacy. So if you weaken the Supreme Court, you expose soldiers to being indicted in the International Court for Justice. So that's one issue where the court is important.
Wow.
The court has allowed rights for gay couples, rights for women. For many years, the IDF was very much not allowing women to apply for many important jobs. The Supreme Court has ruled that women could be pilots, for example. So there are many ways in which the Supreme Court has liberalized Israel, and curbing its power has many dangers, and that's what brought people to the streets.
Okay, so much here. So just a note to our participants, if you have a question for Guy, just click on the Q&A function, and I'll do my best to feed those questions to Professor Guy Ben-Porat. All right, so I was once once in Israel where I had a terrific tour guide, and there are so many that are terrific, that described that Israel has a trilemma. People are familiar with the concept of a dilemma, which is you can have one thing but not the other thing. In Israel, you have a trilemma, which is its character as a Jewish state, its character as a democratic state, and all of the land. So you can choose two of those three things, but not all three of those things. And we're not even talking right now about the land, meaning some promise or hope or path to two-state solution right now. We're really talking about the democratic character, but that's related also to a two-state solution. So just tell us, tell us where you think where this goes. You mentioned that the protests are happening again. This was an active week. Knesset's going to be back in session. What do you see? What do you see over the next few weeks?
Well, going back 16 weeks ago, I think the government has underestimated the opposition. And they made the mistake of laying out all their plans from the beginning. If they had done this incrementally, saying we just want to reform the Supreme Court, this might have not evoked such a reaction. But they kind of laid out their plan. The religious party said that's our plan. The ultra-right said that's our plan. And what that has done is create a reaction among a wide variety of people. And you saw an economic reaction. People saying, well, we're going to disinvest in Israel. And we see an economic decline due to that reform or revolution or coup. Already we have a warning by the credit rating agency that Israel's credit rating might drop. That's a major thing. The high-tech sector has responded in a very, 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 very strong way. Again, declaring that they will not invest, that they will leave Israel, that they will not live in a non-democratic state. And if that's the choice, they'll go elsewhere, and they can because they're very mobile, of course. You had soldiers, military reserves, saying we will not serve a non-democratic state, including pilots, including top commando units. So you had like a bunch of reactions that the government has not calculated, and it found itself in a bind. And that's why we have this discussion at the president's house. Otherwise, I think the government would have gone through with its plan. Now, Yariv Levin, who is the Minister of Justice, has went on an interview and said, well, maybe they're right. Maybe there is a problem with my reform. Maybe if we'd gone all the way, we would harm democracy. He said that explicitly in an interview. So people were not fearing for nothing. And the point now is that there is no trust in the government for many people. But then there's the other side. There is the other side that feels that he's been robbed for winning the election, that the left center elites have used their power, economic and other, to rob them of their electoral victory. And they say, we want that reform. We don't care. So you have a major clash between these two sides. Let me conclude this point by saying that in Memorial Day, in the cemeteries, we had clashes. This is how deep this divide is. So when Itamar Ben-Gurion, the Minister of Internal Security, came to Beersheba, bereaved parents, stood there and asked him, go away, we don't want you. And his supporters came and there were clashes in the cemeteries. That's how difficult things are. So some of the ministers decided not to come to the cemeteries because they knew that they're going to get that reaction. But the level of distrust, maybe disgust, is so high that it's going to take very, very, very long time to amend these fissures.
Okay, we're starting to get some, the questions are building, so let me go to the audience. David Levine is asking, is there growing support for holding a constitutional convention or something like that so that Israel could actually have a constitutional or foundational document like other Western democracies?
There is a growing support, especially by the people that are demonstrating. I'm afraid this at the moment is a fantasy. At the moment, the best demonstration can gain is to block this reform. A constitution needs an agreement, needs some consensus, needs some common goals. And we are so far from that, and we haven't been able to do this for 75 years when we didn't have these deep fissures. So now, at this point, it seems very unlikely. This was maybe a mistake made in 1948 by Ben-Gurion that did not insist on a constitution. But a constitution would have to define what is a democratic state, what is a Jewish state, and how these two things work together. And it's hard to see how, under these terms of disagreement, we can even dream of such a document. So, unfortunately, while this might be desirable, I'm afraid this is not going to happen in the next months. Also, if I can add, the ultra-Orthodox are vehemently opposed to a constitution, always were, for two reasons. First, as once Ali Adeli said, we have a constitution. It's called the Bible. That's our constitution. So if you're going to write one that doesn't align with that, we don't accept it. If you're going to write one that aligns with it, well, why bother? And second, even if you have a constitution, as you know, the major question is who's going to interpret the constitution. So you go back to the Supreme Court. So it's not just drafting a constitution; it's deciding who have the right to interpret the constitution, because it's never specific. You have to decide whether a certain moment is unconstitutional, but it doesn't say so. You have to decide whether abortions are or not a constitutional right, and that, as you know, is up to the Supreme Court.
Okay, our colleague David Burson in Vancouver is asking a couple of questions. One is, just tell us a little bit about the atmosphere on campus right now.
So the campuses in general tend to be very anti-reform. The professors have organized, and we are part of that fight against the reform, because again, we feel that as professors, it's our duty to defend democracy. We have students who are active on this debate as well, on the side of the anti-reform, but we do have differences of opinion. So we do have professors who think the reform is a good idea. We have right-wing professors in campuses, but the majority is on the opposition side. Student body is diversified. We did have debates on campus, trying to talk to students. We had about 6-7 weeks ago, we had a Hyde Park, which was an amazing event. If you know the campus, it was like the main campus. We were like 40 or 50 professors, and we stood beyond kind of the desks, and we just talked to students eye-to-eye level. Just come and ask questions, debate with us. I think we had more than 1,000 students on that day come and talk to us. That's how some of who opposed us, some wanted to get more information, some who had doubts. It was a great debate, and I think it was a very, very good day for the campus in which we could actually talk about these things openly in a very, very congenial manner. And so I think what is actually very surprising, usually these debates are on the social science part of campus. Now it's all over campus. So this is such an immense event with so great consequences. Even people that were apolitical on campus have now become politicized. That might be a good thing.
I mean, it's important for the audience to remember, right? We're a university, we're about education and research and advancing the Negev. We're not a political institution, but you can't completely remove politics from anything in Israel, and certainly in a university setting. One of David Burson, he's got another really good question, which has to do with the strength of the coalition. Do you think some of the members of Likud are are going to abandon ship and force it or leave, or what would cause this coalition to fail and then us be back to elections again?
I'm risking a bet here, but I'll risk it. Can't deny it because it's recorded. I don't think this coalition will survive its 4 years. And there are many options for this coalition to fall apart. We begin with the Likud. That at the moment, Netanyahu does not have an opposition, but it's brewing inside the Likud. He is like the sole leader. He has people that are very much loyal to him next to him. There are many people who are dissatisfied and also worried by the current atmosphere in Israel. So in the Likud, you do have these tensions. And if you follow the news, about 4 weeks ago, the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, has called on Netanyahu to halt the reform. Netanyahu fired
This
him.
is the defense minister that was fired and then rehired?
Yes, he was fired. After he was fired, spontaneously, about, I think, 200,000 people took to the streets. These are huge numbers in Israel, maybe more than 200,000 people. The next day, his firing was halted, and eventually it was dismissed. So he's still the defense minister, but you could assume there's bad blood there, and Netanyahu has a long memory. So that's one issue.
So Netanyahu fired him, but then the people rehired him in a way.
More or less, yes, yes. This was like this. Actually, I was in another conference that night, and I was watching from abroad. This was like a momentous event. This seemed like we're on the verge of an autocracy. Netanyahu is firing the defense minister for speaking his mind, and we're on the verge of something new. And people reacted. People reacted, and spontaneously. In Beersheba, there were about 20,000 people in the streets in Beersheba, which is the right-wing town. So that's how important this event was. So that's the Likud. The ultra-Orthodox parties had their own demands. For example, to make their exemption of military service legal, to legislate a law that will dismiss them from military service. Now, that's not going to happen because public reaction is very, very negative. And maybe I can say something about that. Ultra-Orthodox parties have, for many years, traditionally avoided being part of the left-right security debate. We're saying we're ultra-Orthodox. We are not part of this debate. We only care about our communities, our education, our funding, and we will be pragmatic with every coalition that offers us reasonable gains. Now, in the last 10 years, they have shifted to the right. And now the question is, so now you're right-wing, you are pro-Netanyahu, how can you hold a position of not serving the military? And part of the demonstrations now are directed at the ultra-Orthodox, blaming them for not serving, from shirking from duty. How come we need to serve and you don't? So at the moment, it was announced last week that the legislation that is about exemption of military service is now back on the shelf. So they might at some point say, well, we're not part of it. And by the way, in the demonstration tonight, which was organized by the Likud and is for support of the reform, the ultra-Orthodox rabbis said, we're not coming.
Wow.
Yeah, we're not against, we're not coming. So and the third possibility is the extreme right wing. Going back to the point before, Itamar Ben-Gurion and Bezalel Smotrich have a very clear vision of what they want. More settlements, maybe to annex the West Bank, maybe to begin to drive out Palestinians who are disloyal. And if they do that, this will have, as you can understand, a very large effect on Israel's foreign relations. Netanyahu has to balance between their demands and the national arena. And when he does that, they're dissatisfied. So you have three options of breaking apart. And if I would bet again, and might be wrong here. I think Itamar Ben-Gurion will be the first one to defect. I think at some point he will say, well, this government does not fulfill what I dreamed of as a right-wing government. And if I had a real right-wing government, I could do what I want. And for the moment, he's in charge of the police and it's a complete failure. This will be a way to run away from the failure, put the blame on the Likud and the other parties. I did my best, but they blocked me. Let's go for election again. If you want now to vote for a real right-wing party, there's only one. That's me. So there's three options there for.
Well, that was really insightful piece of analysis, Guy, actually. That the most extreme could be the party that brings it down, which is giving it its more legitimization. Right. Okay, there's so much here, but we've run out of time, and we'll probably have to bring you back for a 7th or 8th webinar in sometime soon as more issues develop. There is one comment in the Q&A that I just want you to react to. There's no name, just a phone number. It's from a family member who's saying that they're struggling. That they don't have trust in their government, and it's creating a lot of stress in their family. Some who live in Israel, and they have family members who are both on the left and the right, and they're feeling really stressed as parents. So maybe just comment for a second, not just as a professor, but as an Israeli citizen, as a father. What are you thinking about in terms of the future? Are you optimistic, or are you not?
I'm a fan of a Beersheba football team, so I must be optimistic. It comes with the territory. Many of us are walking in the past months with heavy hearts, and we're concerned. I think we're concerned because what we are witnessing is a real threat to Israel. And, I grew up in Israel. I raised my daughters here. We all serve in the military, so this is. I don't have another passport. This is my country. I'm not going anywhere. At least as that depends on me. So on the one hand, I am very, very pessimistic. But on the other hand, here's my optimism. I think that 5 months ago, we wouldn't dream of this counter reaction to the government's policy. And people that were apolitical, that were apathetic to what's going on, suddenly realized that their life are on the stake. And what we see in recent weeks is a democratic reawakening.
Yeah.
And with many people who are very committed, and when I see the commitment of those young and old people, it's hard to say I'm pessimistic. I mean, you have to believe, because these people work day and night to fight for democracy. They're inspiring in many things that they do. They sacrifice their time. They sacrifice sometimes maybe their career. And they're fighting for a democracy in a country that they are part of.
Yeah. And
the numbers, this is going on for 16 weeks. And for 16 weeks, every Saturday night, people are coming out to demonstrate. It's not something to dismiss. So in that sense, if I have some optimism, it's in this democratic reawakening that has been, maybe, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe we need it. We need this threat in our face of what can happen to Israel if we stay dormant. And maybe we became now citizens, real citizens, active citizens, and that could be a point of optimism.
Well, I think we should wrap up with that. And I was in Israel, Guy, about a month ago, and I've been to Israel many, many times. I stopped counting my trips to Israel, but this is somewhere near 80, I think, something like that. And it was a very challenging time, but I actually felt really hopeful and optimistic because of all the demonstrations and people participating in the streets. And like you're saying, a reawakening of democracy, and obviously it's having an impact. So through active citizenry and democracy, perhaps this darkness will bring us to even more light. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founder and first prime minister, and the person who's on the namesake of our university, once said that the state of Israel will be judged not by its wealth or its military strength, not by its technology, but by its moral worth and human values. And I actually think we're seeing this play out right now. So with that, we want to thank Professor Guy Ben-Porat for joining us once again. And good chance we're going to be bringing him back again. And also for those in the audience who attended, thank you. And if you're interested in getting more involved with Americans for Ben-Gurion University, we would love that. We are active in markets around the country, have several chapters, different ways volunteers can get involved. So please get involved, go to our website, join what we call a movement for really the best of Israel in a part of the country that everybody can agree upon. We think that BGU is a migdalor, a beacon of light emanating from the Negev desert, where you can rally around all the positive things in Israel, not to say that there aren't other things that are also challenging, because it's a tough neighborhood and there are challenging issues. But we represent an opportunity to not argue about what's wrong, but to rally around what's right. So with that, thank you once again, Guy Ben-Porat, for joining us. And everybody stay safe and take care. Thank you.